Hear that? Nothing? Me neither. But that's the perfect spot for your company's name to step into the spotlight. Become an underwriter for As You Mic It and let every episode be your curtain call. Slip a note to podcast@pashakespeare.org for more information.
That's a lot of pressure. Ending a play is hard.
Ending a play is hard. Welcome to As You Mic It, the official podcast of Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival. I'm Jason King-Jones, Artistic Director here at PSF. And today we're going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to have a one-act rather than our three-act structure, and we're going to dedicate this to a conversation that I just had with Executive Artistic Director of American Shakespeare Center, Vanessa Morosco. I'm here with Vanessa Morosco. Vanessa is a theater leader, producer, advocate for ethical leadership in the arts. She serves as the Executive Artistic Director for the American Shakespeare Center, home of the world-renowned Blackfriars Playhouse, and it's the only recreation of Shakespeare's indoor theater currently in operation. Vanessa's relationship with the company stretches years back. She began as an actor with ASC before moving into leadership roles that eventually led her back at ASC. And her career reflects a rare blend of artist and administrator, someone that's deeply rooted in the work on stage who now helps shape the organization's mission, strategy, and culture off stage. Before ASC, Vanessa is widely recognized for her work advancing ethical leadership practices in the theater field. She's been involved with the theater intimacy education and is a co-founder of the 50/50 Shakespeare Project, which promotes gender-balanced casting and leadership in Shakespeare productions around the world. Welcome, Vanessa Morosco.
Thank you so much, Jason King-Jones. I'm so happy to be here.
So we were just saying you are currently, I'm finding you in the founder's office because in Stanton, Virginia, the internet is unstable. So you're dealing with...
So you mentioned it was the world's only recreation. Speaking of the founder, that's language that was developed for a long time. We've sort of shifted to first ever.
There you go.
In order to keep that American sensibility of needing to lean into a superlative, which I get it, right? You want to acknowledge the culture you're in and the conversation you're having.
Yeah.
Superlatives feel very important to us culturally. I'm always amused that like the world's best pizza is in New York. I'm like, is it? Or, is it in Italy? I don't know. I'm not the the ultimate judge on pizza, but I do know that we love our superlatives. But acknowledging first, I think, helps us be more open and receptive to conversations of recreations around the world.
Sure.
Especially in international conversations. But yes, I'm in the founder's office. And yes, the internet can be unstable in historical downtown Stanton, which is fascinating because I think the more you run a theater too. It's like the more we are successful at the magic of the theater, the harder it is to imagine all the tools it takes. And some of those tools are modern tools, right?
Yeah.
Like we do old plays, but we work in a modern world.
Yeah.
So yes, we may be doing Romeo and Juliet, and that may be over 400 years old, but we really do work with like high-speed internet. And that can be really challenging.
We have to have it, right? Because we
have to have it.
Yeah. When's the last time you had a design meeting for a show where actually everybody was in the room physically?
It's very rare,
right?
It's very rare, and especially in Stanton, Virginia, we have extraordinary talent in our area, but we're also the only professional theater in our area, which means that we bring in designers and directors and performers from around the country, and it's also part of our mission is. Because we have such a iconic space, is to be able to welcome folks into that space, especially those who may have not been welcomed before, so that we're constantly experimenting with new ideas in a fixed space.
Absolutely. So just for our listeners, if we can just take one giant step back and I can just ask the basic questions. Tell me what is American Shakespeare Center and what is that mission of ASC?
Yeah. So the American Shakespeare Center started out in 1988 as a touring troupe, then called Shenandoah Shakespeare Express. Actually, you can see a little bit of it on my wall.
I love it.
Because I'm in the founder's office. So it started out as Shenandoah Shakespeare Express, and its mission was really to recover the joys of Shakespeare for our audiences. And part of that was being inspired by our interpretation of original practices, both in terms of rehearsal practices and performance practices. And I would say the most definitive part of that is oh gosh, I just leaned into an American superlative and now I'm debating that I wonder if it's the most or if there's more than one. But one of the most definitive parts of it is practicing in shared light, which,
Sure.
historically has been called universal lighting, or I love that in the UK it was called democratic lighting, which is a term that is more challenging for us on this side of the pond.
Mm-hmm.
But if we think of it as shared light, it's essentially keeping the lights on for the audience the entire time. So if you imagine the globe, which is lit by the sun, that creates a democratic light, or a universal light,
Yeah.
both for the performers and the audience. The same was true in the Blackfriars Theater of Shakespeare's day, where it would have been lit by candles. And so, what that means is that actors, not only can the audience see the actors, as we do in conventional contemporary theater, but the actors can see the audience. And because we're in a thrust space, just like the original Blackfriars Theater, the audience can see each other.
Yeah.
And so, it means that the dialogue of the plays are able to happen immediately, and we can experience that. It makes the plays really accessible. It means that Hamlet is not talking to the ether, but is, when he says to be or not to be, but is perhaps actually engaging in dialogue with the audience with this really important question, like to be or not to be.
And does the audience respond? To be, not to be.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, with an iconic speech like that, sometimes you get people filling in the blanks, which is really fun, because it's so known. But, it means just, actors are so amazing at being in the moment, right? Taking a script that is essentially memorized, but using each line or each moment as an opportunity to respond to the moment before.
Right.
And the audience becomes the consented to variable that has never been in rehearsal. So it's incredibly alive in the moment. It's something you can only experience in shared space. And the other part of that is it really leans into us collectively imagining together in community.
Right.
And I think that's one of the most exciting parts of it. Yeah. I mean, so we were a touring troupe starting in 1988. We eventually needed a home.
Right.
And in 2001, Stanton said, "Come here." Stanton has a very vibrant arts and culture scene. So it's no surprise that the context already existed, the support already existed. And they said, "Come here, build your home here." And so we did. And in 2001, we opened the Blackfriars Playhouse, the first ever recreation of Shakespeare's indoor theater.
Yeah.
And we're actually celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. So it's a really big milestone year to figure out, what's the next chapter.
Yeah. Happy anniversary.
Thank you. I would say at the ASC as well. I mean, that's when we renamed a few years later, American Shakespeare Center, to sort of expand who we were welcoming and what sort of impact we wanted to have.
Yeah.
I think what sits at the heart of the American Shakespeare Center is we are at our best when we're working at the intersection of scholarship and performance, or education and entertainment.
Right.
Always, Shakespeare is often the first encounter is in an academic scenario. And whether or not, and we can talk about whether or not that's exciting for a teenager to read Romeo and Juliet at their desk. I have lots of thoughts on that. But even if it starts there, what we do have is a really rich scholarship, right? These scholarly debates about Shakespeare are so vibrant. And that's something we welcome into our space as part of the experimentation, really building this playhouse as a laboratory for experimentation.
So how does that look? How does the intersection of scholarship and practice really kind of interplay if I'm coming to Stanton, Virginia to experience the ASC, how am I experiencing that intersection?
I think that's a great question. So in programming terms, we always have talks and lectures at the Playhouse. Lectures probably sounds really like scholarly. I wouldn't say they're experienced that way. I mean, I love a good lecture. But we invite scholars at all different levels of their career with different viewpoints, right? To come in and give talks. So for instance, we've just launched our Shakespeare Saturdays, which means that at 10 a.m. you can have a Playhouse tour, and all of our Playhouse tour guides are trained in the scholarship of Shakespeare and how it relates to the architecture of the space. So you can, do a 1 hour version of that. At 11 a.m. you can hear a talk that's either, we host both practitioners and scholars in that space to sort of do a deep dive into something. And then you can see a matinee at 2 p.m. and then you can see another one at 7:30. So you could really do a whole day that is scholarship and performance.
I love that. That sounds great. Sign me up.
Come on down anytime.
So talk to me about, is it is Stanton a destination? Like, is this a place where people are coming to ASC from DC, from other parts of Virginia, from throughout the country, coming to like spend the weekend in Stanton, or is it also like local folks are participating in this? What's that look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's both. So, because it's a world famous playhouse, people come actually from all over the world to be in our space, and sometimes it's to work with us, and sometimes it's to collectively imagine with us in the audience. And so people come from all over Virginia, all over the country, all over the world to be with us. And that's a huge part of our audience attendance and our supporters who will come for an entire weekend. Because we're a repertory company, we work with the same creative team, right? Or team of creative and emotional athletes who perform 3 different shows within a weekend, right? So I love thinking of it for those who are not theater people. I feel like one of the ways to think about it is imagine assembling like an elite team of athletes, and each night they play a different game. And that also means they play a different position, right? Like one night they might be offense, next night they're defense, next night, I don't know, they're goalie, or, pick whichever sport you like. And also because I think sports entertainment is often our closest sibling, because similarly to what we do, they are also practicing in shared light, right? The spectators are, know the rules of the game, as do the performers. But at any given moment, you don't exactly know how those rules are going to play out. And so that's a really exciting live experience. But to be able to see the same cast or the same creative team switch between roles really gives the sense that you get to know them, and they get to express so many different aspects of talent and skill that they have. And one of those I think that's most important is that they switch between being a leading role and a supporting role. Sometimes in a different show, sometimes in a different moment, sometimes with doubling and tripling, which is a convention of Shakespeare's that we really lean into. They do it within the same play. And I love that because it gives performers the opportunity to both lead a company or lead a moment, and support a company or support a moment. And it creates a community in the Playhouse that feels really meaningful. Like you really feel like you're getting to know that person, just like you might know, an athlete that you follow for, across their career. So we absolutely have people who come in from everywhere, but we also, as a nonprofit, we're deeply dedicated to our mission of serving a local community, because that is ultimately our role as a nonprofit. I mean, and that is everything from, local businesses. Stanton is very dedicated to the small independent business. So if you walk along the streets in Stanton, it's really magical because every business is locally owned. It's small. It therefore offers like a diversity of experiences and a very like in-person experience. And many of those businesses look to me to say, like, you're bringing in people, right? Because we're not a huge city. We're a city, I think it's about 26,000 right now. I mean, you don't get this sort of diversity of experiences and options on the backs of 26,000 people. That requires a robust tourism. But we're also located in the Shenandoah Valley and next to the Blue Ridge Mountains and Shenandoah National Park. And so there's so many experiences to be had here in this beautiful part of the world.
Absolutely. So you were asked to become the executive director. You're thinking about, okay, what does that mean creatively? And then you're there, and then you're being invited to like Rotary Club meetings and right, and the local chamber. Talk to me about balancing for you Vanessa, balancing the creative work, the ambitious, strategic, the future of how ASC sits in the American theater and the global theater conversation with Shakespeare, and the daily work in a city of 26,000 people that are looking for you to help be an economic driver.
Well, first of all, I'll say my job's a lot, but I'm here to do it. I mean, I've loved this company for a really long time and was part of the sort of the early work when the Playhouse was first built. I was here on stage and have been back subsequently to direct several shows before the pandemic shutdown of theaters and many other industries. But so I've loved it for a long time, and I feel like I sort of know deeply its core and its heart, and have invested a lot. But But I think in this leadership position, what I find is the ability to be able to intersect the sort of love that I have for the work with the love that I have for the industry and where I'd like to see the theater industry evolve. When I first came to Stanton, there were so many surprises, right? Like, so my husband and I had been living in New York City for many years, and my career was out of there. And so, first of all, like, I just had to figure out how to be a human in Stanton. For instance, I had to purchase a car.
Yeah.
Everyone said to me when I took my position, "Aren't you afraid to like take over a theater at a time when theaters are like barely starting to maybe build back after a pandemic shutdown?" And I was like, I don't know, I'm far more intimidated about purchasing a car. Like, that's something I haven't done in my adult life. Luckily, I wasn't one of the New Yorkers who didn't know how to drive, so that was not an intimidating factor. But that was just not something I had to do. And so even just like the specifics of thinking about how to do life in a smaller area or in an area where there were not so many working professionals, because we're the only professional theater, right? You don't have the same population, was really tricky. It was even as specific as like walking down the street. So in New York City, when I would walk down the street, and you can't see this, in the podcast, but I stand at 6 feet tall. So I definitely have like a long stride.
Right.
So when I would walk down the street, I could walk fast. There was a sense of like, the culture of New York, because we live, it's like, what is it? 11 million people on a tiny island.
Right.
I mean, there is that real respect for space, which means sort of the gift of anonymity, and therefore there's privacy in public.
Yeah.
And so I could walk down the street at quite a clip. And when I first arrived to Stanton, in my mind, it would take me like 2 minutes to walk a block.
Sure.
And I quickly discovered that was not true. It would take me at least 20, because along the way, I would encounter so many people who would identify who I was and want to have conversation. And those conversations were genuine.
Sure.
So I think for like the first year, I was late to every meeting until I learned to like completely recalculate time to be a stronger community member, and make sure that I made space for those impromptu conversations that were incredibly meaningful.
Yeah.
It was also really shocking because, I've spent my career working in Shakespeare theaters, mostly classical theaters.
Yeah.
And so because we're the only one here, people just shorten the name American Shakespeare Center to Shakespeare. So when I walk down the street, people say, "Hey, you're Shakespeare, right?"
Right.
Or just call me Shakespeare.
Hey, Shakespeare.
Which I'm like, I think I hear that in a way that you're not communicating it, but it's kind of delightful to be called Shakespeare.
Amazing. I love that. It's so funny. That reminds me of I think the very first STA conference, the Shakespeare Theater Association conference that I went to was actually in Nassau, at the Bahamas, and there was a similar anecdote that Nicole was talking about how in the Bahamas, how they would similarly like point her out and say, "Hey, Shakespeare," and so like she was recognized as Shakespeare, and the kind of takeaway from all that is that everybody standing in the room really is Shakespeare now, that we are all representing Shakespeare for our own communities. And it's exciting, and it's also a little intimidating to think about, that we're the carriers of that torch. What's taking that for you, Vanessa, what's that like in being part of that larger conversation? Like, because we're referencing that, the reason that we know each other as well as we do now is because we work together at the Shakespeare Theater Association. We meet on an annual basis. We're also a part of committees that are regularly meeting right now around diversity, around the life of the theater moving forward and Shakespeare moving forward. How do you see how do you see yourself sitting into that larger global conversation that we're entering into?
I mean, I love that question. So I feel that, one of the most exciting things about, being a part of the American Shakespeare Center in the role I'm in now is the opportunity to collaborate with other Shakespeare theaters around the world and with other Shakespeare thinkers.
Yeah.
I think, it's fascinating to take over a company that's already had a long life, because I think my responsibility is both to shepherd, what we've been into the future, which, now that I say that out loud, it's sort of what I think about Shakespeare in general. Like, I think Shakespeare, because he, wrote a long time ago and he's not there to actively collaborate with us. But he needs us, right? Like, he needs us to to partner him into the future,
Mm-hmm.
which I think he's very capable of because his plays invite collaboration.
Yeah.
But the sort of what we need from him now is a little different than perhaps what we needed from him 100 years ago or what we needed from him 200 years ago. And I think the same is true of the American Shakespeare Center. Maybe what we
Mm-hmm.
needed from the American Shakespeare Center back in its early days of 1988 is different than what we needed when we built the Playhouse, and is different than what we need now.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious about how do I serve the greater theater industry with the institution that I'm responsible for? How can I help contribute to the field, but also invite the field into the Playhouse?
I suspect you've encountered this before as well, but I do want to think about this sense that when you're inviting audience in, because of course we can't do this without our audience. And, we're thinking about like a day in Stanton or a weekend in Stanton or people traveling from all over. The idea of intersecting scholarship and practice means that you're also inviting people to kind of come in with their curiosity alive. So being in a place of question as opposed to kind of coming in with answers that they're expecting to see. And I think sometimes I've encountered an audience that thinks they have the answer before they enter the space. And I wonder if, what it's like for you to help guide an audience into a place of curiosity and questioning as opposed to trying to check the boxes that they're expecting to have checked for them.
I mean, it's always a balance, right? I mean, when audiences come in, they often have expectations, and those expectations can range from, how I'm supposed to behave or how they're supposed to behave, which I feel is like a very American sensibility of coming into an audience, right? I mean, when I sit in theaters around the world, I'm always confronted by how the American style of coming together is often to really like style police each other on how to behave.
Sure.
And when we're in shared light, it's what I love about it is it invites what many theaters are having to curate specific nights for, this sort of relaxed audience experience. But we're essentially always a relaxed audience experience because we're in shared light, and therefore the things that may be perceived as a disruption from one audience member to another don't necessarily have the same negative impact if we've curated the space well, because we're when our audience is on stage, we're already engaging and inviting responses, which curates a space to have a diversity of responses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think increases the comfort level of audience members to sit next to each other. But ultimately, I feel that is our goal, is to create a space where audience members that are really different from each other can come together, which is a really, really hard thing to do. And we often hear that the US right now feels very divisive. And so I think we're really challenged as theater leaders to bring people together. I mean, ultimately, to me, that is what theater is. It is the radical act of community, of bringing people together in community. But how do we create a space where they feel that that they can be themselves in that? I can't think of anything better or anything more exciting to try to pursue than to curate a space where two audience members may sit next to each other, and they may not have the same aspects of difference, whether those are visible or non-visible, right? They may not have the same gender identity, the same racial identity, the same cultural experience, the same socioeconomics, which is something we pursue a lot in the funding world, right? They may not have the same, identify as the same generation or the same, they may not vote the same. But how can we create a space where they can sit next to each other and experience joy for the 2 hours traffic of our stage? That feels to me to be the challenge that we're always taking on. And I love that Shakespeare, you talked about more questions than answers. It's one of the things I love about Shakespeare is I think it's one of the reasons he continues to excite us is that his plays ask more questions than answers. I mean, I love that in his time, he was actively rebelling against the most popular form of theater, which was the morality play, which in simple terms tells you how to live your life. And when you walk out of a well-curated Shakespeare play, I hope that you're not quite sure about that, right? I mean, I love that some of his most lovable, engaging characters are highly problematic. Like Macbeth is a great example, right? Like, I mean, he talks to us the most.
Yeah.
And I feel the character that talks to us the most, especially in Shared Light, is the one that we end up feeling attached to because they're the most open with us, just like a human, right? They talk directly to us in soliloquy.
Yeah.
They're so open. We develop a relationship with them. But do we really want Macbeth like as our buddy in life? I don't know. I mean, ambition kind of goes awry, and yet we feel ambition. And so I love that we can engage with these human experiences in a way that isn't a prescription.
Sure.
Right. It's more of an exploration.
Speaking of explorations, can you actually explore with us a little bit from a scholarly angle this idea of the morality play and Shakespeare rebelling against it in his time? I think that this is not something that we've been talking about a lot on our podcast, and so maybe this is our first time our listeners have heard something about that. Can you expound on that for us, Vanessa?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you know, I think that, well, I would say that one of the things it's easy for us to forget that Shakespeare was a young upstart playwright.
Yeah.
So if we think of like, who are those people in our world right now, whether they're writing plays or they're producing podcasts or they're creating movies or something that's, you know, that has a version of entertainment that excites our imagination.
Yeah.
I think it's easy for us to forget that he's working in the context of his world.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things I think is exciting about a playhouse that invites the conversation about original practices is that it invites us to ask, what were the questions he was asking? What were the barriers he was facing? What were the things he was trying to achieve? And how can we ask similar questions now rather than come up with the same answers? Because we as humans have changed. Although I will say, have we changed? Because like we still love these plays. So have we changed that much? I don't know. But maybe that's really dark.
Our fashion has changed a little bit, but
yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, voting rights have changed. You know, lots of things have changed. Antibiotics, indoor plumbing, Wi-Fi.
There you go.
There's some things we
don't have heads on pikes when you walk into a city right now. Anyway.
Do you know we do have audience members that sometimes love to, you know, criticize me or the ASE for not adhering to original practices, right? Like that there are certain things that are not, you know, exact.
Oh, yeah.
And to which I want to say, you know, yes, we have indoor plumbing. You're welcome. Yes, we have modern fire codes. You're very welcome, because that did not go well in London at that time. And these are good things. These are evolutions in our world. But thinking of Shakespeare as like an upstart playwright, I think is really important because it allows us, it invites us to bring that energy to the plays and to the experience that we're curating with the audience. And Shakespeare walked that line really well. And we know that because he was successful in his time. Right. And one of the barriers that I think he faced or navigated really well was I think he navigated one of the largest diversity issues in his England, in his globe, which was, I would say, is a version of class or socioeconomics. And we know this because you had a groundling that came in, right, for a penny.
Right.
Came into the audience, and the queen, who was his biggest patron, and everyone in between. So how do you write to include that entire audience? And I think that that's an invitation to us to ask, what are the things that are challenging for us to bring an audience together? And how do we do that as well as he did? Now, did he do, he's a playwright, right? I'm not saying that he did everything perfectly, but there are ways that we can be inspired by what worked.
Can you give us an example, thinking about those kinds of questions? And those are all fantastic questions, Vanessa. You've recently done a production of Romeo and Juliet. And I think before we started this podcast, we were talking about how you have hoodies that have Montague and Capulet. But what are some of the ways in the production that you were wrestling with these challenges and these opportunities?
Yeah. So one of the signature art forms that we bring to any production you see at the Blackfriars Playhouse is all of our actors are actor musicians. So music is really part of Shakespeare's plays. They're written into his plays. And we expand that idea. So what we do is we invite all of our performers to help like create an experience for the audience that's almost like an induction. So 15 minutes before the show itself starts, before the narrative of the play starts, all of our actors are on stage playing music, singing songs, and that music is contemporary to our ears.
Yeah.
The way Shakespeare's music would have been contemporary to his audience ears.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way of thinking about how to interpret original practices for our times.
Sure.
And so that music is often thematic. One of the ways that we make sure it represents different perspectives is we actually have a whole system of sourcing not just the performing company and not just the director, but we actually source everybody in the organization for inspirations of, what music do they feel, what song are they interested in.
Nice.
And our goal is to create a range that is especially in Romeo and Juliet, one of the things we really pursued was generational inclusiveness. What's the song that makes you feel like a teenager? And what is that song for different generations? So that you can really help set a tone, which is a little different than, how sometimes music is used, for instance, in movies to sort of create an emotional ride.
Sure.
Right? It may take you on an emotional ride, but it's not necessarily telling you to feel this, or we're not pursuing it in a way that tells you to feel this way at this particular moment.
Mm-hmm.
This is happening outside the context of the narrative. And what I love about that is it also helps induct an audience into a shared light experience. And it works both ways, right?
Sure.
So the actors come out, they're probably in their costume that they're going to wear for the first scene.
Mm-hmm.
They have all their instruments. They're what our current music director calls professionally informal. So they're engaging in dialogue with the audience, and it's an opportunity for them to build a relationship with the audience outside the responsibility of the narrative of the play. And this is something that occurs throughout. And even at intermission, or interlude, as we often call it, they will come out again and play some more. And what's exciting about that is it also just frees up this sense of how to be in the theater.
Sure.
I think that sometimes we're very we're not sure, and generationally I think this happens as well, as it does in every workplace, in every space, different ideas of how to come into a theater and how you're supposed to behave is it varies a lot. And so figuring out a way to kind of bring people together and permit and accept a multiplicity of behaviors is partly what we're looking for. It also encourages an audience to participate. I mean, what I love about Shakespeare's plays is, at any given time, some scholars will say he probably had 12 to 15 players on stage.
Right.
And then some were jobbed in as journeymen when they went on tour in the continent, which a lot of new exciting scholarship is coming out about that right now.
Yeah.
It was probably a smaller group, and this sense that the play itself was really flexible, and the goal seems to be to tell the story with the tools we have. Anything we can do to help invite that, to inspire imagination is what we're playing with.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. You were just touching on the idea of some scholarship that's coming out about Shakespeare's company traveling into Europe. Can you tell us a little bit about where the field is right now on that, and how you're interacting with that at ASC?
Yeah. So I think there's some really exciting scholarship coming out about it now. It was sort of undiscovered before, but maybe just a tidbit is the way we know how many people might have been touring, right? Because there was a time in Shakespeare's England where the theaters were shut down, right? So then what does a company do?
Right.
And one of the answers is you go somewhere else. But to go somewhere else, we know this from contemporary business in the industry as well, is it has to be smaller, it has to be agile, it has to be flexible, because you're moving to different spaces and then you're needing to accommodate spaces. So, in some ways I feel like the tools of creative humans are still the tools of creative humans, and the way we problem solve is not really that different. And that's exciting to me, because I think the creative potential of, a practitioner is extraordinary.
Sure.
I have a lot of faith in the human imagination, and creative problem solving. So when Shakespeare's company would tour, we have an idea that it was a smaller company, because we can see where they stayed, how many candles were used. A lot of it comes from that nitty gritty data that probably the rest of us in the world would be like, I don't want to study that, but thank you to the scholars who did.
Sure.
Because it's like inventories from like guest houses, right? That tells us like how many beds were used, how many, what were the things that were needed, which gives us a sense of the numbers of people that were doing that in the company. But they also, there's also some interesting scholarship out there that suggests that when Shakespeare's company toured the continent, because there wasn't the same taboo of women playing parts on stage, that often it was like wives who would tour with them that knew the plays, because of course they did.
Right.
And so they would jump in and play the roles because there wasn't the same resistance from audiences that were not in Elizabethan England, right? There wasn't the same resistance to that. And it's a really practical solution. These creative minds will come up with really practical solutions to something, which is often what we need to do what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I just love the idea that, because we always say this, it's been a part of what we have understood about Shakespeare's company since our beginning, right? That these were male actors and they were always male actors. And it wasn't until the Reformation that we ever saw women saying these words out loud. So the thought that during Shakespeare's lifetime, that there were, in parts of Europe, there were women who were actually playing these roles, that Lady Macbeth was actually being played by a female, that Beatrice was actually being played by a female. That's just so exciting to think about. And that it could be
is really
one of the
exciting to
actors'
think about.
wives too.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, right? Like, I mean, I don't know about you, but you probably talk about some of your work with family. We often
of course
have, like,
not. Are you kidding me?
families.
No, not at all.
And right. And so of course, like, when we share, right, if we're sharing that knowledge, then we're actually empowering people to know about what we do. And therefore, it turns out they really know what we do. And that's really exciting. And of course, in Spain, there's so many, at the time, there's so many plays where there are roles written for women.
Right.
Whereas, I mean, like any playwright, I mean, if you're a successful playwright, you are writing for theater at the moment and for players at the moment.
Yeah.
And so, what we see in Shakespeare is that he's not writing for women practitioners.
Yeah.
And, it makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it's partly why, my partner, Peter Simon Hilton, and I founded the 50/50 Shakespeare Project was through really discovering not just this truth about Shakespeare, but, I mean, maybe truth sounds like too absolute a word, but not just about acknowledging the business practices of his time and how they relate to the business practices of our time, but we actually experienced it firsthand because we were both performers. We were doing a production of Much Ado About Nothing. And, one of the great things about working with your partner is you get access to their process. And, so here we were in our tiny New York apartment, preparing to go rehearse Benedict and Beatrice. And he was so annoyed with me because he was like, your lines so fast. And is that because I'm a quick learner and maybe he's one of the actors who's slower to learn? Maybe. I mean, we're very different as artists in that regard, in many regards. But what we did notice is that, Benedict has 5 soliloquies and they're in prose. And in prose means you have like a long leash, right? You can kind of flex and bend any way you want. And as Beatrice, I had 1 and it was 12 lines and it was tightly knit in verse with a rhyming couplet that doesn't even rhyme anymore in the way that we pronounce it, which definitely have a lot to say about that because Shakespeare definitely wrote a rhyme. It's really hard to play that soliloquy if you don't get your rhyming button. So the other thing we noticed is that Benedict sort of leads every idea in a scene, right? He initiates each idea.
Yeah.
And if the Benedict has done their job really well, then just like sort of a vaudevillian duo, he sets up the music of it. Yeah. And if Beatrice is really good at being the other half of the vaudevillian duo, then Beatrice will mimic the music of it, and the audience reads it as wit. And what that means in the rehearsal room is that if you're in the role of Beatrice, it's extremely difficult to initiate any ideas because you don't have the textual support to drive, to start, to change directions. And the same is true in terms of relationship with the audience. If your Benedict has 5 soliloquies, that's extraordinary access to a relationship with an audience. Yeah. And Beatrice, and I name these characters because Beatrice is, like this iconic character that I think, still wins our hearts today.
Absolutely.
And makes us feel like that it's exciting to champion women.
Yeah.
So it's not the character is not exciting. It's actually the structure of the play that reveals that, in general terms, that's what we would probably think of as an intern's role, right? It's played by a young boy, usually a teenager,
right.
In Shakespeare's day, because that was the convention of the time. So even as we see her voice drop out toward the end of the play, which happens a lot, and Benedict sort of drives the whole thing home, that makes a lot of sense to me in the context of Shakespeare's business. So you're not driving home and ending the play with a blackout, which is a very modern convention. You are bringing it home with the words, and so of course you want that in the hands of your expert practitioner, your person who has been at the job for a long time, not your person who's the teenager.
Right.
And so once we start to sort of unveil the business model, I think it reveals a lot of aspects in terms of how it is at odds with the business model we would like to pursue in the modern world. And then trying to figure out how to navigate that is really, I don't know, it's exciting work.
Yeah. But it also, boy, doesn't it reveal just how different Rosalind is, though, compared to the other characters, since she does end it and she ends it with an epilogue and she notes how strange it is. You have thoughts on this?
I would say that Rosalind, it clocks in, I think, at about 680 something lines when we think of her as the big role, right? That's about the same as Prospero. It is a big role. It has a lot of responsibility in the text. However, I mean, Hamlet is usually the one we think of as the most iconic role. And that's like, I don't know, 1,500 lines.
Right. Yeah.
So when you think about it, it's half the size. And I would say that Rosalind doesn't technically end the play. She has an epilogue.
So tell me about that. What's the difference for you? So she doesn't end the play, but she has the epilogue. So the play is ended by other folks, and then there's an epilogue. Does the scholarship support that epilogue is often done, or is that, do we still expect that epilogue to happen?
Well, I think it's different, right? It's an afterthought. So I think if we look at the sort of dramaturgical structure of a play, right? The end is like the big bang, right? It usually is a rhyme, because that's like the big drum beat of the end of the play.
Right.
And again, if we think about removing contemporary production values and saying that the actor is solely responsible for that moment, which I love that about Shakespeare. He had such faith in actors, right? Like the actors really made all those moments happen.
Yeah.
And if we end the play, then an epilogue has a different texture, a different feeling from an audience perspective. It's not really the sort of big climactic moment. It is, in fact, an add-on. Sort of like the way the Globe practices the convention of having a jig at the end, right? It's more in that vein. And it was very revealing to me the first time our production of Hamlet 50/50 was premiered, which was at Shakespeare Notre Dame. I was working with an extraordinarily experienced performer in the role of Horatio. And in our version, Horatio is niece to the queen, which gives her social mobility that captures the true sense of Horatio, who's able to talk to seems to be able to move between all the classes and all the worlds. Yeah. And in order to create movement in a way that was believable in the context of the play itself, rather than putting a design concept on it, we needed to elevate her status in order to give her social mobility and have that feel like it was believable.
Sure.
In that version, she ends the play, and it was so meaningful to have dialogue with this actor about it. So I was directing her, and she said, so she had been at a Shakespeare company before where they had a fun closing where they would say the last lines of all the plays. So she actually knew the last lines of every single Shakespeare play sort of accepted within the canon. I think it was probably the 37 canon.
Yeah.
And the thing that was amazing is she was like, none of those are women. And so she had never ended a play. Even though she had tons of Shakespeare credits, she had never had the responsibility of ending a play. And the sort of vulnerability and anxiety that brought up was so meaningful to partner, because, when we promote somebody who has not been in a position, historically has not been sort of raised into a position or has not had practice at something, and then we suddenly give them this big responsibility, means that we need equitable support for that. And to build up the confidence of that human to end the play was a really exciting journey to take and very revealing.
Vanessa, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm just looking at our own clock and looking at that endings have to happen. I wonder if I can give you the last words in this interview. What are any final thoughts that you want to have to share with us?
I hope 25 years from now, whoever is leading the company feels like they have been set up to ask the questions that they need to ask for their community. My goal is to help an organization stabilize, which is what a lot of theaters are doing right now, and create sustainability for the future so that the next generation feels like they can ask the questions that they need to ask and that they can engage an audience and a community in a way that feels right for them at that time.
Vanessa, thanks so much for being a part of this. This was a fantastic conversation. We probably could have gone on for another hour, but endings have to happen.
Endings have to happen. I love it. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Again, a big thank you to Vanessa Morosco for taking the time to chat with me today on As You Mic It. Just a reminder that single tickets for Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival 2026 Summer Theater Series, Legends and Legacy, is now on sale. Just go to the box office or go to pashakespeare.org, or if you like that phone, 610-282-WILL. That's 610-282-9455. Thanks so much for joining me on today's As You Mic It.
Thank you for listening to As You Mic It, a Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival presentation recorded on the beautiful campus of DeSales University. Our music is by Cedric Lamar, with hosts Jason King-Jones, Kim Carson, and Connie Behringer. For more information on our summer theater series, giving opportunities, tickets, and more, visit pashakespeare.org. Be sure to like, subscribe, and we'll see you at La Buddha.
Behind every standing ovation is a network of patrons who know that theater changes lives. With tickets funding only half the cost, PSF counts on contributions to produce world-class theater, cultivate new audiences, and nurture future generations of artists. Give today at pashakespeare.org/support. Great theater is a collaboration both on stage and off.